That's nice.
Good afternoon, and welcome to this next in the series of wonderful events in our week of celebrating ACPE Proud. My name is Patrick McCoy. I'm the chair of the Foundation for ACPE, and I'm pleased to welcome you to this year's Glaze Plummer lecture for the first time conducted in a virtual format as we explore together what it means to be together in different ways than we are used to. The Glaze Plummer lecture, as you may know, is supported by an endowed gift from Howell and Madeline Adams that was established in honor of ACPE supervisors Maxine Glaze and Stuart Plummer. Maxine and Stu contributed to CPE and our association in innumerable ways, among them as early leading advocates of programs that strengthen the exploration and dissemination of knowledge and theory as a foundation for supervisory and educational practice at CPE. To that end, the Glaze Plummer Fund sponsors each year a lecture addressing some leading edge of learning in a discipline that supports the distinctive approach to experience-based action, reflection, learning that we embody as an organization. In recent years, a number of ACPE certified educators have been exploring and integrating the ideas and methods of system-centered theory into the practice of clinical pastoral education. Increasingly, theory papers presented by CECs in the certification process have cited Ivan Agazarian, the founding theorist of SCT, and other authors who have contributed to its development, especially as an influence for understanding group dynamics and guiding the practice of group supervision. In particular, the concept of functional subgrouping as an approach for developing the full potential of groups and their members has attracted significant interest as a contribution to the teaching and learning of spiritual care. I'm especially delighted to have the honor and pleasure today of introducing Dr. Claudia Byram as the 2020 Glaze Plummer Lecturer. Our presenter today is a longtime collaborator with Dr. Agazarian in the development and teaching of system-centered theory and its methods. Claudia is a graduate of Radcliffe College, Harvard University, and the Bank Street College of Education in New York, and she holds the PhD degree in child development and child psychopathology from Bryn Mawr College. She has over 40 years experience in the private practice of group and individual psychotherapy and in school psychology. And she began work with Ivan Agazarian as a contributor to the development of SCT and as a senior trainer in the institute that emerged from that work since the early 1980s. In addition, Dr. Byram is a senior leader in the continued development and teaching of SAVI, which you may know as the System for Analyzing Verbal Interaction, a model for understanding verbal communication as it contributes to problem solving in therapeutic, organizational, and educational contexts. Dr. Byram has been a frequent presenter at conferences and workshops of the System-Centered Training and Research Institute and the American Group Psychotherapy Association. And many of us in ACPE have come to know Claudia as a warm and inspired colleague and teacher. It is truly a delight today to welcome Dr. Claudia Byram as the Glaze Plummer Lecturer.
I think I'm meant to come on here, Patrick.
I think you are.
So I'm blushing, you probably can't tell. I don't recognize myself in all that lovely introduction, but some of the facts I know. So I thank you, and I'm glad to be here. I just want to take a moment to introduce John, to bring John on. John, can you pop on for a minute? No, John, yoo-hoo, there you are. So just so you know, because we're going to be talking about systems today, this is delivered to you by a system, this lecture today. So John is the tech system. He's going to be with us the whole time. Patrick is going to do some demonstrations with me as we talk, and I'm going to talk to you for an hour. So thank you, John. Thank you, Patrick. See you guys around as we work.
We'll be here.
Great. Okay, so although I'm here to talk to you about functional subgrouping today, I want to acknowledge that I'm aware that this is part of essentially some kind of a recognition, a commencement in a sense of the certification of many of you as clinical pastoral educators. So congratulations. And as you go forward in your work, you will have make use of the resources you've developed. And functional subgrouping and system-centered is also about making use of resources. It's about making use of the resources in ourselves and in the larger systems we're a part of. So for those of you who know something about system-centered work and functional subgrouping, I hope this will add something, this talk today. And for those of you who don't, it might intrigue you a bit. Before I get going anymore, I want to acknowledge briefly Joan Hemingway. Joan Hemingway is the person years ago who discovered that system-centered offered something to her in clinical pastoral education. She had a passion for the role of groups in clinical pastoral education and the power of it, the potential, and also wanted to have some way to attend to and manage what she would see sometimes happening in groups, which is natural, which is the pull to hot seat dynamics, like identified patient, scapegoat dynamics, or the pull to sort of stable, secure systems groups that don't potentiate development as much as they might do, because development takes a certain amount of difference that is a certain amount of insecurity. So I hope today that we'll make another step at bringing some of those ideas into your system. Hang on a second, I'm going to go with myself here. Although functional subgrouping is the method developed by Yvonne Agazarian, as Patrick said, it's one of the methods that implements the system-centered theory. Yvonne, in her training, was trained in psychoanalytic and psychodynamic field. Then her graduate work was in group dynamics at Temple. She was very disturbed that there was not a similar language for talking about individual and group dynamics. It was like they were two different fields. She also studied field theory, Kurt Levine's field theory, and was a member of the General Systems group at AGPA. So out of these resources, rich resources, she developed her theory of living human systems and its application, which is system-centered practice. Functional subgrouping is one of the core methods in the system-centered practice, and that's obviously what we're talking about today. So, as I understand it, your goals in working with your students, or if you're students in developing yourselves, or if you're in the field, are to develop the resources of resonance, attunement, sufficient ability to separate from our clients that we can keep the goal in mind, our goals in mind, and focus our contributions in a way that are likely to move toward the goals. That's a big order. It's a very tall order. It's one we work on for our whole lives. It's especially important for practitioners, for your students, for those of you who are working in the field, because we work in emotionally charged environments, which means that we're stimulated by the systems we're working in and have a challenge to both open to what's stimulated in us and to keep ourselves in the context that we're working in. It's what's so odd, but I have a goal, so that's what you do. My goal is to send you off with some curiosity about system-centered work and system-centered functional subgrouping. It's a way of looking at interactions, at hearing them and hearing ourselves that is a little bit different. But what's so odd is I'm talking to you about a method of connecting, of attuning and resonating, and I cannot see you. I can't hear you. You cannot see and hear each other, most of you. And that's a very strange environment for what it is we're talking about today. So I'm imagining you. I'm imagining some of you sitting there maybe peacefully. I think it's toward the end of your week, having maybe a cup of tea or coffee, listening. I'm imagining some of you daydreaming. I'm imagining some of you tapping your foot impatiently, tapping your pen or your foot, wondering when I'm going to get going. Some of you might be managing your cat or your dog or your noise in the environment. So I'm imagining all of you. You can imagine each other. And as you're imagining each other as well, recognize for a moment that it's unlikely that you're the only person having an experience similar to your own. If you're foot tapping, if you're interested, if you're drifting, someone else is very likely in your subgroup. And as you're aware of that, just see if it makes any difference in your inner experience. Yeah. And take another step, which is recognizing that in a system as a whole, every subgroup's experience contributes something to the system. From that perspective, your individual experience is yours. It's also part of a subgroup, and it's also a part of the group as a whole. It's a different way of thinking about it. By the way, I didn't mention this at the beginning. At the end, put up questions that they may come up along the way, and we may not get a chance to answer them as this talk is not very long, but we will go through them afterwards and organize them and put some answers together, and those will come to you. Okay. So although it's not our job today to work with these different subgroups in our system, we don't really have the environment and it's not the goal. We do have the goal of becoming aware, increasingly aware of ourselves as part of systems. We are all the time. We're part of living human systems in different levels in different ways. So that is part of our goal, and we'll refer to that as we go along occasionally. Okay. First, I want to say something about what systems refers to in the theory of living human systems. So system is more than a collection of people. It's a system of beings, let's say members, that exchange information and energy. That's the difference between a collection and a system. Here is an example of a non-human system. John, could you put up the slide number 2? John is getting there, I think.
Are you not seeing the birds flocking?
We're not. We're seeing the words that say birds flocking, and then we're seeing they might be invisible birds, John, but they're not flocking.
I am sorry, Claudia. Having a little bit of technical difficulty here.
Okay. Well, so everyone, use your imagination. Birds are flocking. Actually, it's a wonderful image. Maybe we'll put it on later if John gets it worked out. What I really want to say about it is that it's beautiful, but it's so coordinated. And that is a system in action. So there's some exchange of energy and information among those birds so that they're moving together. It's like music. What's another piece of that is we could learn a lot about this species of bird by studying one of them. We could study its anatomy, its genetics. We could study what it eats, what it's been eating. What we could not do is understand its flight pattern by it alone. We need to see it in context. The birds don't have to be aware of that. We as humans are different. We have the capacity to become aware of the context that we're in, that we're contributing to. that we have an exchange of energy and information. Here's an example of a human system. That's slide number 3, John. If you could put it up.
One moment.
Okay, thank you. So that seeing ourselves as part of a system means that just what we were talking about earlier, we see ourselves both as our own personal selves and also as a function of the larger system. So this is a system, a living human systems represented schematically, which helps us with the abstraction. So this system, if we think of it as having the boundary around the edge, also has an exchange of information inside the system. And particularly important for our work is the exchange of information between our thinking and feeling, what system-centered work calls our comprehensive and apprehensive systems inside, our comprehensive thinking and our apprehensive feeling. When we have access to both and information traveling between them, we know things we didn't know before. Okay, John, thank you. Like I'm at the moment managing my apprehensive awareness of some excitement and some anxiety, and very curious what it's like on the other end when think I'm relating to you, but I'm actually relating to this image on the screen. It's very strange. Okay. So here's another representation of a human system, of human systems. Slide 4, John. So these are a collection of people. And if you click on it, John, we'll get some definition here, which would make it slide 5. There you go. So this is a representation of the collection of people in the system with an exchange of energy and information. We can see that the energy information is not exchanged evenly all the way around. That would be typical of our systems. But there is energy. The arrows represent some information transfer between the different subsystems. So I'm going to call these systems and subsystems. Another word for submember is a subsystem. So I'll probably use those words interchangeably. Okay, thanks, John. We can see that the contribution of any one member affects others and affects the system. So that's important. It affects the system as a whole by what the members put out, what they do, what they say, and what they don't say. What's important is what we don't say also invisibly affects the system we're a part of. It's some of the information that never comes into the system. So in that way, a family or a group or a couple or a CPE group is a system. It has a boundary, it has members. Systems are defined by their boundaries. There's an inside and an outside. The boundary can be permeable or rigid. I want to talk a little bit more about the difference of systems where boundaries are more permeable and where they're less permeable. So the interactions among the members, among the subsystems, start to shape the system, maybe toward cooperation and clarity, toward competition, an active system or a dead in the water system where there's very little energy and information coming out into the system as a whole. So another thing that's very important here is that the systems we build then tend to run us. The systems we build run us. Who we are, what we say, how we behave in any system is at least as much a function of the system as ourselves. So think about this for a moment. Think about yourself in one familiar environment, one familiar living human system, maybe your family of origin, maybe a friendship group. Just think of yourself there the way you are, how you feel. And then think of yourself in another system, maybe the work system, the work environment. And just recognize you behave differently, you see things differently, you may even know different things. It's very interesting. So the systems we build make a big difference. So then we ask ourselves, as I'm sure you do, how do we build the systems that emerge the resources that are most likely to support its development and the development of its members over time, as opposed to get fixated or get dead in the water or get it locked into some fight pattern that isn't productive. So how do we support the development of a system? So John, would you put up slide number 6? Yeah. So here's another representation of a system. The smaller circle at the bottom, this is the system-centered picture of systems coming into being. The smaller system, at the picture at the bottom, circle, the oval, represents the members. It represents all those little circles in the earlier version. That's the member level. The larger circle represents us as a whole. It's our group as a whole. So all of us as individuals are in the little circle, represented by the little circle, and our whole group is represented by the big circle. So there are similarities and differences in the membership in any group and in this group right now. So left to ourselves, our natural tendency in any new environment is to gravitate toward perceived similarities or toward perceived higher status figures. We also move away from differences or perceived differences that are too different. We might wind up with a pattern of interaction where familiar talks to familiar, like talks with like. So these you could take that off now, John, thank you. These approach avoid responses are how we begin to organize ourselves in an unfamiliar environment, not necessarily consciously. This happens at the beginning of any new system. It's a way of finding some stability by seeing where we affiliate and where we avoid. The result is that, as I said, groups can become organized by familiarity. And some of these organizations may be by status, by friendship, which may not be related to the context, by race, by gender, by education, credentials. So these are the groupings that are familiar to us. Then the question we have, are they relevant to the goal of the group? If it's a cocktail party, might be okay, might be relevant. If it's a work group, it's probably less relevant to the goals of the group. So these groupings are often more related to what we'd call an implicit goal, the goal of security, a natural human wish and desire, and necessity, actually. The phase in which groups are organized this way to reach some security and reduce anxiety is often called the flight phase of development. And that's what system-centered calls this phase. And his system-centered work has a lot to say about the particular ways we tend to organize ourselves in the flight phase to reduce anxiety or manage our anxiety. So this process is, let me just step aside here, just do it a little differently. What we now understand because of the work that's happening in the fields of neurobiology is that there are neurological underpinnings, neurobiological underpinnings to this process, to the approach, avoid, and to these naturally emerging, more stereotypic groupings. Susan Gant has spearheaded the work of matching and translating the impact of functional subgrouping into its neurobiological underpinnings. One of the values of this that means a lot to me is that it helps depathologize these tendencies. I think it's very easy to think and feel others should not have the tendencies they have, and we should not have the tendencies we have to, say, make a lot of social chat in a work group, or to explain ourselves over and over and over, or to do some of the other things we do when we're anxious. But it is part of our wiring when we feel uneasy to try to make ourselves secure. This is our social right brain from infancy. From infancy is highly attuned to possible danger and to differences. Some of you may have seen the videos of the research with mothers and infants. It's painful to watch, but very instructive. The mothers and infants are an attuned interaction. The mother then makes her face blank like this. Some of you may have felt some anxiety go up with that. I felt some anxiety doing it. The infant responds very quickly, first to try to engage the mother, more smiling, more laughing, more reaching out, then to distress and even panic, and then to shut down and withdraw. It's hard to see, but that is wired into us. Those are our nervous system reactions. I'm going to be mentioning two researchers particularly, and there are two articles by Susan in the bibliography that I've included. And in terms of the neurological underpinnings, I've been mentioning Porges and Pansep quite a bit today. So the raw, simple way of saying our human response to differences is that we hate or fear differences that are too different for us. And we gravitate toward security and stability, which is in similarities, what we already know. Porges hypothesized that the perceived threats of these differences, and it's very subtle, can be tension around the eyes, some movement in the face or body, or the language or voice tone, that it activates our sympathetic fight-flight nervous system, and more extremely, the freeze, dorsal vagal nervous system. That's what you see in those infants. I'm just checking my timing to see how I'm doing here. I'm behind. Okay. So behaviorally, our typical response to differences that we experience as too different are to change them. We reason with them. We explain why they're wrong, gently, of course. We may go one up. We may yes but them and argue. We protest. We complain. We undermine. We even retaliate if we get frustrated enough. Or we may withdraw, shut down. Sometimes it's out of anxiety. Or we may simply ignore them as though they don't exist. And that's the way we kill off the difference. To the extent these groupings become, the more stereotypic groupings become rigid or institutionalized, they reduce the chances of system development, of the system developing the resources it needs and has potentially in the system as a whole. And if the information can flow more freely, these resources have the potential to be discriminated, to be integrated, and to make the system richer as a whole. So while the stereotypic subgrouping creates the benefit of stability, it has the cost of development. The norms and our culture is dealing with this now as we try to tackle the deeply, deeply ingrained issues around racism. We have other stereotypic systems embedded in our culture as well. At the moment, we're really many of us trying to have a look at racism, both in the institutional racism and the interpersonal norms around race. Shifting these will mean shifting the boundaries of our subsystems, opening these boundaries to information from other systems in the group as a whole, other subsystems in the group as a whole. This is a never-ending process. Change changing the system and system norms is ongoing and is responsive to changes in the larger context. So we'll see, but it's a never-ending process. I know I'm sure it's one that's very meaningful to many of us here. So closer at home example of closed systems might be a hospital, say, where the doctors tend to talk to doctors, the nurses to nurses, aides to aides. Nobody talks to maintenance. People don't actually listen much to the patients. So that system would not actually be very effective in exchanging the information for patient care. So differences and development. So the problem, we've got the problem of these responses. So here's the other problem for us humans, which is differences unbalance the stable equilibrium of the system. So the potential to reintegrate becomes available. So we need to get a bit unstabilized to get the difference in, and then reintegrate in a more complex way with the difference. Similarity supports stability and equilibrium. Differences are required for development. This is a little sidebar now about group development. I mentioned flight. So you may also recognize the fight phase of group development, which is as differences become more apparent, and we may become more comfortable to voice our opinions and our differences. Our fight phase is enters, and the more stress there is, the more people in flight, well, stress in our systems in flight or fight, the more likely we are to go into protective behaviors. For example, being vague, hiding behind a smoke screen, talking on and on, even not checking to see if we're understood, dominating, going to a passive or submissive role, withdrawing. SCT sees these reactions as embedded in survival roles. We all have these. These are patterns of interaction that we develop early in our lives to both protect our inner life force and integrity and to get along with our caregivers. We need them. They are survival roles. They're very much embedded in our subsystems. These are roles that we tend to move into under stress. We get to know them. It's very helpful because it gives us more choices around them. At the group level, these naturally emerging patterns of interaction, managing underlying anxiety and frustration, can create typical patterns in group development. In the early phase, flight phase, we may get identified patient patterns. Some of us identify as identified patients, make ourselves a patient. Others of us go into caretaking roles. And in the fight pattern, we may emerge the scapegoating roles. And this is some of the dynamics that Joan Hemingway was aware of when she got interested in system-centered work. Finally, functional subgrouping is a way of addressing these underlying patterns of dynamic by shifting the communication pattern of the group. So it's a deliberate shift of the group's communication pattern. So that's the talk, what it is, how it works, and why bother. Okay. So functional subgroups are the fluid middle system in the group as a whole. John, would you do slide 8, the 3 ovals? Here we go. So the middle system is the functional subgrouping system. As you can see, it's the boundary between the member and the subgroup is in this functional subgroup. As the middle system, work in the subgrouping system affects both the member level and the group as a whole. So it is the most efficient system for intervention, for bringing in differences, for discriminating them and integrating them. John, we're going to go straight to the video on functional subgrouping. Oh, back. Yes, right. That was right. Only hold it. Don't start it yet. Thank you. So that I want to do it. Just don't start it yet. So that's what functional subgrouping does. In functional subgrouping, we identify the differences in the system explicitly. And they're going to be the differences that matter at the moment, the ones that are crucial to the work. So early in a group, it may be the difference between people who are excited and people who are anxious. Excited on the left, anxious on the right. So the subgrouping changes over the moment to moment, over the life of the group, over the life of the one session. Okay, John, play it. Sound, please. John, we need the sound on this.
Still no sound?
No sound. Back to the beginning.
Nope.
How about the little sound button on the left, lower left? Still need the sound button.
Yep, I'm trying here.
That little sound button on the lower, did you get that one? Was that turned all the way up?
Here?
On the left end. Yeah, that one.
Yep.
Okay. Okay, I will narrate. Here we go. It's not as nice because it was a lovely English voice narrating, but you're gonna have to put up with me. So go back to the beginning, John, please. Okay, so we have the two subgroups. Let's say that's the anxious subgroup and the excited subgroup. So there's the whole group. Before the difference comes in, there's a difference. Here's the difference separated into, coming along, subgroups. Because there's that one represents the natural impulse to relate to the difference, to attack or get rid of the difference, to explain it away. And instead, using functionally subgrouping, what we actually do is separate these into different subgroups. We interrupt the communication to the difference and instead direct the communication to the similarities. What we begin to discover, which is important about that, is that our anxiety level goes down. And as we begin to talk, differences in the apparently similar start to show up. Just bearable differences. And as these emerge and the other subgroup works, we begin to notice similarities in what was originally too different. In other words, the boundaries between the two subgroups become permeable. And as they become permeable, the group as a whole reintegrates in a more complex way. So that's not the easiest thing in the world to imagine. It is take a little bit of, it takes practice and awareness. John, yeah, thank you. Let me get regrouped here a little bit. So it'd be good if we could all practice together, which we cannot do, I'm afraid. We don't actually have the time to do that. So what we're going to do, Patrick and I are going to demonstrate sort of one of the core skills of functional subgrouping, which is joining. At first, we're going to demonstrate how not to do it. Patrick, would you come on for a moment?
Here I am.
Hi, I
Hi.
missed you. Where have you been? I've been here all by myself. So what's going to happen is I'm going to put out a statement, and Patrick is going to respond with one of our typical non-subgrouping responses. I'm going to put out the same statement again. He's going to do another typical non-subgrouping response. And the third time, I'm going to put out the same contribution, and he is going to join. And And since we understand now about our mirror neurons, where we have, that's the function of our resonance with what we see and observe other people going through, you might notice how yours fire as we do this, go through the different stages. So, Patrick, I start, don't I? What I just said. Okay. So I find myself a little anxious right now, as I'm not quite sure how I'm going to get through everything I want to get through in the time remaining.
Why would you be anxious about that? You're certainly an experienced speaker.
Okay, that's cut. That's our first round. So Patrick, I find I'm getting anxious about getting all the material in I want to cover today in the time we have.
I see.
Okay, response number 2. I'm getting desperate here. So Patrick, I'm starting to get anxious about covering the material in the time that I have. I'm excited about it, and I'm getting apprehensive.
Yeah, I have a mix about. I feel kind of turbulent, and like I really want this to be instructive for everyone, and I want to do well in my part. And at the same time, I'm really excited about what's emerged so far, and very pleased with what I'm hearing.
Great. Okay, thank you very much. Hang on for a minute, Patrick. Okay. So we call that exercise push, wave, and row. And the first behavior that Patrick did was a push. We think of it as pushing the other person's boat right out to sea, but it emphasizes a difference. The wave gently suggests a difference without actually, gently suggests a similarity, sorry, without actually putting in anything of oneself. And the join does. It builds with something from oneself. Let's do it quickly again, Patrick. If you would put something out, I'm going to do a push, a wave, and a row.
So I'm finding myself really wanting to present myself well in this moment and
Patrick,
do well.
don't worry about that. Don't worry about that. You'll do fine. That was a good one.
I feel very pushed.
Again.
So, Claudia, I'm feeling kind of a lot of turbulence about not sure that I know how to do this right, and I really want to do it right.
Okay, yeah, I understand that. Yeah, that's natural. Okay, that's my wave. And last time, Patrick.
So, Claudia, I'm finding myself kind of a little bit turbulent and kind of anxious about wanting to do this exercise well and show myself off well.
Yeah. So I can join that, Patrick. I get a lot of energy when I do this, and I want to do it well, but I get I'm concerned that my energy that gets spontaneous screws it up. And it's an important piece of learning for me to model this for the group. So I hope we're doing all right. I think we might be, but I hope we are. Okay, I'm going to check time. Just hold on one more minute, Patrick, before you go. So we have technically 15 minutes?
Yep.
Okay, goodbye, Patrick.
Hey, bye-bye.
Okay, so joining the previous speaker with a similarity, putting in your own version, asking anyone else. Those are the steps of subgrouping. Would you put up the step with the slides of functional subgrouping, Patrick? Thank you. Slide with the steps. So we put in what we have to say. When we're finished, we say anyone else. Join with the similarity. If you have a similarity, the full protocol means you reflect the previous speaker first. I'd like to do that with Patrick. We're not going to have time. You reflect their energy as well as the heart of their message, the heart of the content, and check to see if they feel heard. And we're creating many subsystems for the group as a whole if we work together until that communication is complete. We pause, return to our own experience, and then build. When we've finished again, we say, anyone else? And if you have a difference, if we have a difference, we ask the group if it's ready for a difference. And that's the equivalent of bringing in the other subgroup. If it is, we bring it in, ask anyone else. If the group is not ready, we hold. Thank you, John. There's a shortened version of this in the packet that you'll be getting from John if you haven't got it already, but don't read it right now. Okay, so I'm going to skip Patrick and I subgrouping. I want to note again that functional subgrouping interrupts our typical communication patterns, and in that way can be quite frustrating. Whatever our pattern is, it's natural, it's our natural pattern, and of course naturally generates frustration. Back to neurobiology. Our visceral experience of feeling more relaxed when we know we're secure is a function of our autonomic nervous system. We don't really have a choice about that. Our right-centered social brain is always checking for a neuroception of safety or of threat. This is from Porges. As the social animals we are, our first response under threat is to seek connection. When we find it, our heart rate settles, the striated muscles of our face relaxes, our eyes open wider, breathing deepens. Porges relates this activation to the ventral vagal activation, the nervous system along the front of our bodies, which we have also called the parasympathetic nervous system. We become more open to ourselves and to others. This enables empathy, attunement, curiosity, and our exploratory drive. Porges termed this process social engagement, and the exploratory drive also is similar to what Pansep calls the seeking. I'm going to show a picture of that in a second if there's time. The seeking subsystem, part of our really wired-in neurobiology as well. These experiences develop an alternative to our old attachment patterns. The capacity to experience co-regulation with one another in subgroups can be quite different from the old patterns and develop a new pattern. I don't know that we get rid of our old ones, but we can develop alternate ones. Can't do an example, no time. I want some time for you all to contribute your thoughts to this. So I'm going to end with a quote, I think, from Susan Gant, the 2018 article. SCT sees these threat-oriented activations as linked to early survival roles that at one time represented our past adaptation when stressed and related to our early caregivers. Functional subgrouping encourages us to activate the resources of our social engagement circuits by making eye contact, joining and building on similarities, where we build attuned and resonant context for exploring. Over time, subgrouping develops here and now adaptive roles that also allow rewiring our habitual responses. And in this way, subgrouping changes our minds, which then changes our brains. And as our mind-brain changes, that reference to Dan Siegel's frame of mind, the group brain can develop. Yvonne Agazarian and Susan Gant introduced the idea of a group mind, which emerges out of the interactions as a group. A quick picture, slide 9, please, John. Thank you. So just a quick representation of the difference between an open, functional, exploratory system on the left, where information can move through the different system levels, and a more stereotypic organization on the right, in which the boundaries are closed and very little new information can move among those systems. It's food for thought to look at it that way and think of it that way. So there's a developmental process in joining, and I'm not going to have time to go through some of the elements of that. Sad. I'm going to do it anyway. We're going to do it anyway. So here's a quick version. So because some of the capacities we develop in the process of functionally, okay, John, thank you, functionally subgrouping are crucial to our work. The capacity to attend to someone else, the capacity to hold our enthusiasm or our reactivity against something until they finish speaking and said anyone else. The capacity to reflect and resonate so the other person knows they've been heard. The capacity to then return to ourselves, find out where we are, and put that out. And the capacity to hold on to our difference and make room for it, and until the group can make room for it. And back to the beginning. With any luck, these are some of the same skills you've worked to develop in your students and will be working to develop in your students, and that all of us are working to develop with our clients and in our clients as well as ourselves. It's an ongoing process, goes on through our whole lives. For me, it's an ongoing process. So at this point, I'm going to stop. And in summary, the why bother part is the why bother is a development of a group system, a group mind that potentiates the development of all of the minds in the subsystem, all of us as members, and can develop rather than become fixated. Okay, we have 7 minutes. I'm going to turn this over to you in just a minute. So John is going to unmute all of your mics. You'll see the little light goes on the side. And I want to ask you, it's on the right side, little green, it's gray right now, little gray microphone. When John unmutes you all, I'm going to ask you to click that microphone and make it gray again for yourself. This will cut out any background noise and allow you to listen to other speakers. So we're going to spend a minute putting in your responses. This is a very broad subgroup, which is any response that you have to what we've been saying that you think you'd like to put out into the group and share with this larger system. The only thing you need to do is say what you want to say. When you're finished, say anyone else, and try not to talk over each other. That's going to be challenging, but we'll see how it goes. It's an experiment. Okay, so John, unmute everybody. And everybody, please then mute yourselves individually. Let us know when we're done, John, when we're unmuted. Sorry. Thank you for unmuting yourself. Okay, so anybody else? But not all at once.
Question is whether or not flight, fright, or freeze. Is freeze at all dealt with in this subgrouping process?
Yes, if you think about how we respond to differences, our freeze will show up in different ways as we work together. So the dorsal vagal freeze reaction shows up by losing our ability to think. And in that case, we know that we're in a very high anxiety state and we need some subgrouping to bring our energy down, some resonant eye contact and some joining. I have an example of that, but I'm not going to go into it. Thank you for your question. Would you say anybody else? I'll say it for you.
Anybody else?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. My name is Ngan Long. Thank you that from your presentation, I understand actually that's how we manage anxiety and safety, these dynamics that develop into different group phases, and the subgroup functioning become a vehicle to help us to navigate, to grow the group. Anyone else?
This feels like just a beginning, and I'd like more. Anyone else?
Let's say a little bit about more. John is sending around a packet with some information, a bibliography, and a way you could get more. But also in your own system, there are people who've trained in system-centered methods. Patrick is one, and Gillica Zolfrank, Kitty Garland, It's Ross. And there are some resources in your system. I think there's a study group as well. So both within your system and in other contexts, there are resources. Back over to you.
How do you understand our political division at this time in light of SCT? Failure to join?
That's such a great question. You could probably answer it yourself. You've failure to join. I think the only thing I would add to that is boundaries that are closed by the explanations we're giving ourselves for what's happening. And when we live in our explanations, we aren't open to new information. Explanations are what we know or think we know. And opening to difference means letting go of our explanations. Anyway. It's heartbreaking, actually.
Could you say more about how that's heartbreaking?
The amount of energy and capacity there is in the human, that all of our systems are fueled by the human life force. And the amount of energy and capacity in our life force is immense. And when it's locked into these differences, there's a loss. And the loss can be from minor to major. And as we know around the world, it can move into genocide, it can move into terrible kinds of events, as well as the family arguments or families that aren't speaking to each other. That's what I mean. Does that respond to you? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's helpful.
Resonate with
Anyone
me?
else? Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Claudia, this is Sarah. It made me think of Yvonne's own story as a child in World War II, and she saw her brothers, and they died as pilots in the British Air Force, and she saw how the world kind of fell apart over exactly what you described.
Exactly. Actually, one of her brothers was a pilot. Another one who died was in the secret SOE and was underground in France. So yeah, I think it probably has a lot to do with the energy. Actually, there's on the SCTRI website, there's a video, which is, it's called The Edge of the Unknown, which is about the emergence of SCT and links it somewhat to Yvonne's life.
I thank you for your presentation. My name is Miguel. I wonder if there is a fear of what's the fear in closing the boundaries, and I speak because I'm also very saddened by what's happening, and I want to be open, but I have to recognize that sometimes it is hard for me to be open to what I perceive as lack of receptivity. So I'm mirroring probably the other side of the division, and I'm feeling kind of stuck because I feel fear of compromising my own integrity.
Say anybody else, that's so important.
Anybody
Please.
else.
I've got to plug myself in. I thought I was plugged in. Keep going, I'm here. Somebody else keep going. Somebody else join, please. Sorry, guys.
We're actually right at 3 o'clock, Claudia.
I know, but John, I want to stay with you and talk to you.
Okay.
Would somebody please join that last person before my computer goes?
I join you, Miguel. Nanning speaking. The differences make me not to talk with some significant topics with my family members, because I know that I assume that we hold differences, and cut off myself from some of the social groups because of the different political views. It's painful. At the same time, it also is painful to listen to them. So anybody else?
Thank you.
Mhm.
And we are at our time. I thank you very much for your attention and for your making contributions here at the end.
Thank you.
And I hope
Thank you.
wish you all very well.
Thank you
Take
very
Thank you
much.
very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Gotta plug my fucking computer in. Excuse me, guys. I was plugged into the wrong outlet, which was dead.